welcome back to the programme. Our newsmaker this Wednesday is Peter Fanconi. He's the chairman of BlueOrchard, a Swiss-based company that specialises in impact investing. Before that, he was CEO of the private bank Vontobel, CEO of Harcourt Alternative Investments and managing partner at PwC. Today, he still wears many, many hats, and that's because he's a chairman of the Graubündner Kantonalbank and the vice chairman of Deutsche Bank here in Switzerland. My colleague Anna Maria Montero spoke to Peter Fanconi, and she asked him if the proverb, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day, teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime, makes sense when talking about impact investing.
For me, it's a lot about education, really. First of all, learning for my own behalf. And I think, once I had reached a certain level of information and knowledge, it's about sharing and teaching and building awareness. So I think that goes pretty well, this adverb, yeah.
And it's what you would say kind of drives your business at this point.
When it relates to impact investing, absolutely. I mean, we are in a growth phase. There's a huge increase on demand. There's a lot of players becoming active in the space. So from our perspective, the company I'm working for, who basically have created this entire market.
Which is BlueOrchard.
Which is BlueOrchard, yeah. So we really try to help and support, and create basically the awareness and show investors, but also governments, how basically these whole topics can be implemented in their daily lives.
And what is this industry? What does the impact investing landscape look like here in Switzerland?
Well, Switzerland is actually a birthplace of impact investing. United Nations headquarters, obviously, in Geneva. And a company like ours, BlueOrchard, has been founded by the initiative of former General Secretary Kofi Annan 20 years ago. And the idea was really to build a commercial company who would have the ability to really place assets within frontier markets, but not on a pure development aid side, but really using commercial terms and activities. And I mean, that was Mohamed Yunus, obviously, is the somewhat founder or the initiator of microfinance. And then BlueOrchard basically took it one step further to really commercialize that business.
And who would you say right now, of course, besides BlueOrchard, are the biggest movers and shakers of impact investing?
In Switzerland, there are several of them. Some of them are spin-offs of BlueOrchard, and there have been new players coming on board. I think what is important to always differentiate, there are players in impact investing who are active in frontier markets. And on the other side, there are big players, in particular banks. If you read the news today, there's always a new announcement that there's a deployment of impact investing, 4 billion, 5 billion, huge volumes. But these volumes are mainly placed then in developed markets, public traded markets where actually also impact can be provided. But these are more ESG plays or socially responsible plays. And the pure impact investing is really focused on frontier markets and emerging markets.
Okay, that's what I was going to ask you, the difference between a frontier market and an emerging market. But they're one and the same, or?
Well, I mean, of course, there are differences. I mean, frontier markets, we usually measure in regards to the poverty rates we see in the countries. The frontier markets, they have a clear tendency to have a much higher poverty rate, 40–50% of the population. Emerging markets obviously have developed quite a bit in that stage. But for us, we taking an investment or basically taking a decision to deploy capital in these markets is really driven by the need of the population. And secondly, by the ability to really deploy money into a country. There are countries and areas which might be called emerging markets, but we can simply not deploy capital due to political reasons. And, at the end of the day, it's a commercial business, what we are doing. So, it's always easy, to deploy 10, 20, 30 million into a country. But the difficulty is really to assure to basically able to retrieve the money, because there are investors waiting for the returns and for the money. So, yeah.
Because, I mean, even though impact investing has that sort of, has that goodwill aspect to it, it's a kind of inherent part of impact investing. It's also a business. So you have to be able to make a profit, which always, the question to me is always, how do you convince investors get on board impact investing projects when it seems like the risk is quite high to invest in a frontier or emerging market?
I obviously would have had quite a different perspective on that topic. I think, generally speaking, it's triple bottom line. That's how we call it. So whatever we do, we need to see the financial return. It's a commercial business, as you said, but we also need to have a proof of a social impact and certainly an ecological impact. So we basically measure all the three components. For our investors, they might have different perspectives on why they would invest. They will pick one of these three. Some of them also have a combination. So we need to make sure that we have the ability to provide the commercial returns, which in the case of BlueOrchard over the last 20 years are roughly 4.3% on an annual basis. So in the current yield environment, pretty attractive investment. Has been different 7, 8 years ago. But since the last couple of years, probably one of the more interesting fixed income exposures. And the investor then, he basically decides in which area he wants to focus more. But for sure, we always need to provide the commercial terms. And the commercial terms, that's something which is quite important to understand. It's at the end of the day, it's important to measure default rates because, whenever we provide, for example, a credit into Cambodia to a farmer who's a rice producer, obviously our overall social component and ambition is that he will always be able to return and repay his credit. If he goes into default, we failed. So we need to find the right balance in order to assure that the borrower has the ability to repay, create his own economical upside, support his family, send his children to education, etc. But we still need to get the return. So it's kind of a balance. And I think over the last 20 years, we have been doing a fantastic job here.
Do you find that it's a trend that kind of comes and goes? Obviously not for you, it's your mandate at BlueOrchard, but, in the outside world, do you feel like it's something like, is it a cyclical kind of involvement, or how do you see this?
No, I think it's an incredible development taking place, since already 20 years. We started with SRI, ESG, with the Millennium Goals, driven by UN and World Bank. Today we're talking the SDG, the Social Development Goals. In my perspective, there's demand and supply which needs to be balanced, right? Unfortunately, the demand is here because we've got, despite figures showing in the other direction, we actually have got an increase on a relative perspective when it comes to poverty, driven by climate change, driven by migration topics. So there's a huge demand here. And on the other side, the supply today is really pushed and driven bottom up. You've got the millenniums, you've got the new kids on the block.
There's a growing, there's a growing interest, especially among the younger generation.
It's incredible. If I ask young people today, where they want to put their money and where do they really want to make an impact, it's all about this theme for sure.
And what about big banks? They're also jumping in and
big movers
in the game. Why now?
Today.
You've been doing it for 20 years, but why now?
Yeah, well, they always have been doing it, frankly, in particular the private wealth part of big banks. You always had clients, philanthropic positioned investors, they always were active. But now the banks have really taken it up as a topic, as a strategic topic. Partially it's marketing. On the other side, it's also really a bottom-up process.
But it's not just a sign of a late cycle.
No, I don't think so. I think, there's such a huge gap of capital which still needs to flow into that direction. The World Bank is talking roughly 2.3 trillion a year, which is the missing gap, missing piece into areas which have a very high growth rate and GDP. So we are talking here about really developing countries where you potentially can make a lot of money, and there's a huge gap here of flow of capital into these markets.
Why?
Because a lot of players have not really understood how to play the market. It's quite complex. BlueOrchard, we are investing in 70 different countries, frontier markets. You cannot run, a microfinance book out of Zurich or out of Frankfurt or New York. You need to be local. You need to understand.
You need to go there.
Oh, you have staff needs to be local. You need to understand the political situation.
That's a huge investment, no?
It is. Well, huge. I think it's in particular, it's quite complex, which probably also shies away some player to enter the market because you really need to invest. And besides being complex, you really need to fold back your sleeves. And, this is not five-star world. If you work in these markets, if you are in the field, it's very different than having a career in London than working in one of our offices in Phnom Penh, for example. So you really want to do that. You need to have a little bit of mission and also vision where you want to take this. And it's kind of easy because you also see the actual impact you're having. BlueOrchard today is probably reaching out as we speak to roughly 40 million individual borrowers. Now, every borrower probably has got at least 5 family members. So if you start to do your math, you come up 200 million, which is about 10% of world's population living in poverty. And this is done by, a team of 100 people. So this is very motivating for individuals who really want to make a change.
Well, it sounds like something that was very motivating for you. When did this begin for you?
Good question. Well, I think I was always attracted to the topic, and in my career, I was always trying to find, a bridge where I can basically use my knowledge I have on the finance sector and being an entrepreneur, and combining that with really, giving a sense and really helping people who are in need. So I think it's a lot about putting dots together, and I think that's probably what really drives me.
Because I would say, traditionally, going back to Scrooge, bankers get a bad rap, for not being
That's not
so
true.
socially.
That's not true.
Well, I'm glad you're here to contradict me.
I would totally contradict you.
Yeah.
I think this picture is changing dramatically. I mean, bankers, friends I have here also, in Switzerland, a lot of them, they're very much intrigued about what we are doing. They're helping, they're supporting, they became ambassadors. They are in our boards, they join on field trips. They really go into the dirt. They want to understand. So I really think, it might have been different in the past, but I think society and maybe also, social environment has really changed the picture for, at least for my generation, for sure. My generations, we are learners at this stage. I think the generation of our children, they're just going to be used to these activities.
I hope so. I hope so.
I'm actually quite convinced. I have the privilege also to teach at universities. I'm a board member in the US and in a university. And when I have the ability to talk to young children, it's so motivating because people are really, really interested. Yeah. Where again, in my generation, it was more about, reading about it, could it make sense, could it not make sense? But we have a proof today, and young individuals really want to have an impact.
Well, there's plenty more from Peter Fanconi in part 2. In a moment, he'll explain how technology is changing impact investing. Stay with us.
Let's talk tech. Do you want to see the latest gadgets? Understand where robotics will take us next? Find out more about the pioneers and their latest research? Join us on Tech Talk, where we'll be meeting the people behind the big ideas here in Switzerland and around the world, and finding out what it means for businesses, consumers, and the planet.
Tech Talk with Anna Maria Montero on CNN Money Switzerland.
How do you turn your idea into a successful business in Switzerland? If you want to develop your business, have individual mentoring and coaching, optimize your business model, develop a marketing strategy, acquire new skills, learn how to network. Romandie Formation, business opportunities anywhere.
that you dropped this?
No, it's just a penny.
Just a penny? Just a penny? It all begins with the humble penny. Whether writing your first check or cashing big checks. To those at the top, making their mark, closing deals round the clock. On Quest Means Business, we know every penny has power. And it's not how many you have, it's what you do with them that counts. That's the marvel of money. Quest Means Business. What a profitable hour!
Only from CNN Money Switzerland.
The Swiss Pulse delivers you the most important global and Swiss business and financial news, connecting Switzerland to the world. Tune in every weekday from 6 p.m. or find us on the go on our website or social media platforms. Welcome back. You are watching the Newsmaker Hour, and we're focusing on impact investing tonight with BlueOrchard chairman Peter Fanconi. It's all about making money through good causes. My colleague Anna Maria Montero talked to Peter about the future of his business and also to what extent technology is shaking things up.
You're laughing. What are you thinking about?
I love this topic because, you know, when I was in Nairobi couple of weeks ago, last time, I was together with a client of ours. We were sitting in a cab, and he wanted to pay the cab driver from the airport into the city. And the cab driver said, you know, I don't take cash. You know, don't you have, you know, the mobile device with an M-Pesa account?
Whoa!
And, you know, and this is something we really need to realize here. We talk about fintech and blockchain activities. You find countries in developed markets, they're far more developed because they started from scratch. And, you know, if you look in our business, we need to transfer money, small amounts, etc. We need to amortize, and these are mostly very remote areas. So using smartphones to transfer cash, you know, has been done for 10 years now, and it's working extremely well. So I think there's much more to see in this country and to learn. But I partially also have my doubts, and if I may reflect on that, my doubts in particular in the finance business and in the lending business. At the end of the day, you know, this business is built up on the yields and the returns, right? And I've been seeing now some crowd lending platforms, you know, trying to go global and really, you know, approach African states, you know, through Facebook accounts, and you can request a $20 loan, etc., which is fantastic, only goes with technology. On the other side, what I've been realizing is the defaults rate actually have been starting to increase rapidly because people, you know, they do 3-4 clicks and they are basically given a loan and there's no due diligence. And if default rates increase, the neighbor is going to pay for it. And we have been seeing that the interest rates started to increase. And that's, of course, a very, very bad signal because then poor people basically need to start to pay for the default of the neighbor because he was able to apply for a loan on the computer in 20 minutes. So the lessons we learned is we really need to be there and have a personal interaction.
Yes, which is what I was thinking, you know, when I brought up earlier the risk of being involved in these frontier markets, you know, and these kinds of things that could potentially happen. But, you know, in a few things that I said earlier, I read and saw about you. You bring up the number of the amount of people that live in poverty, which is 2.3 million.
Billion.
Excuse me, exactly, billion living in the world. And you say that a lot of this poverty is man-made.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It's extremely frustrating. I mean, you know, if you think about inequality, right? At the end of the day, poverty, you know, is really related to inequality. and in particular where we see states who have not really developed politically by fraud or malpractice of the politician. States did not really develop, and these are really man-made topics. Climate change is another topic. I mean, we're expecting, according to the World Bank, roughly 100 million new people falling into poverty in the next 10 years, only due to the effects of climate change, which again then provoke migrations. We've got overpopulation in Africa, which is also, potentially man-made because there are no birth controls. So I would definitely underwrite that, yeah.
Now that you bring up climate change, there's also this idea of green finance. And so I was just reading the most recent Finance Watch report, and Switzerland makes the top 10, but not quite the top 5. So, but I know is this something that BlueOrchard is looking at as well?
Yeah, very much so. I think we have been granted by the G7 states a mandate to really invest into climate projects. And to give you an example, so we are searching for, we are trying to fight the effects of climate change. And how are we doing that? We are providing insurance coverage to smallholders throughout the world in order basically to protect them from any fallouts of their agricultural activities, because that's a bit the problem. You might have a loan provided to a rice farmer in the Philippines. The problem is, if his field is flooded due to climate change, he won't be able to repay the loan. The consequence of that usually is migration. That's exactly what we want to avoid. If you provide insurance coverage for flooding, then at least you can mitigate the effects of climate change. Right. It's a very smart way to really fight climate change.
The more I listen to you talk, the more, obvious it is. Again, I read it, but you wear so many hats. I feel like you have so many balls in the air at one time, all the time. How do you manage that?
I love what I do. I guess it's also, part of organization, but I just love what I do. I'm totally convinced what I'm doing. I'm learning every day. I'm meeting great people. I'm allowed to go and see, governments in Japan, in Australia, and Switzerland, but I can also meet, people who are starving almost to death, and which emotion...
That gives you perspective, no?
Oh, yeah, which gives you a perspective and is emotionally extremely challenging. But it just really makes you think, and it makes you act and want to react. And it's not really a question, do I want to get up and do I want to get on that plane? Because I know why I'm going to do it, and I see the impacts. And it's not me. I'm simply representing, pension fund payers here in Switzerland who are investing through our activities. So I'm representing, probably millions of individual investors. I'm just in between, basically.
But just such different worlds, from maybe sitting at the Cantonal Graubünden, board meeting, to getting on a plane and going to Kathmandu or wherever,
There are different worlds, but, it's all about people at the end of the day. I enjoy both worlds, as long as the people are honest, and it's transparent that people want to move. I think it's really great to work with, entrepreneurs, skilled individuals. But, you find them all over the world, and I just love interacting with people.
Yeah, this is true. And I know you have a family. We're not going to get into the details, but this is a question that women often get, is how do you balance work and family? How do you make that work? So I'm going to pose it to a man now. How do you make that work?
Okay. It's a very difficult challenge because, obviously, I travel a lot. My wife, she also travels. She's working. She's a journalist, so... we basically try to organize ourselves. We've been doing that for the last 20 years. I think with ups and downs, we've been doing quite a good job. We've got a lovely daughter, which we love dearly, and we've got a family, I think, very strong ties. So I think we somewhat have proven that it works, with downside where we don't see each other, once in a while. But it's all about talking with each other and finding a way how to basically handle it. And as long as also both sides really know, what is going on and what needs to be achieved and what the vision is, I think I feel also extremely supported by my family.
Do you have to rely a lot on, devices? I know I do.
Yeah.
Tablets and...
Absolutely. I couldn't do without it. I couldn't do without.
But imagine 10 years ago, that wouldn't have been possible. Or I don't know, when did Skype launch? 15 years ago?
Impossible. No, it's impossible. That's
No.
I find that so fascinating. You know, I mean, you can be in a remote place on this planet, and you know, you can basically put yourself in the room and you position yourself into, I don't know, an asset management company in London, and it works. You know, it's absolutely not a problem. I found that's very fascinating.
If I can change gears now, and if you put your banking hat back on, and talk a little bit about what's the Swiss banking landscape look like for you now? I mean, what do you see in it 10 years after the crisis?
I mean, I think there are probably different angles to that from different banking perspective. I mean, as we all know, you know, it's these 10 years have been the 10 years of regulation, obviously, with partially also being over-regulated. The regulation, you know, has partially stopped a little bit the entrepreneurship or the risk-taking of many banks in Switzerland, which I partially, you know, find is probably not really the right way to look how to really have banking growing. On the other side, I think transparency has increased dramatically. So
this is a good thing.
Yeah, 100%. You know, I think for the clients and the beneficiary owners who work together with the bank, I think that's a very good thing. Sometimes I question a little bit, you know, if we just have not become a little bit too much denying any risk activities, because at the end of the day, a bank is also paid taking some risks, and the investor is also, you know, he wants to be paid also.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And I feel like I can't sit here and not bring up China. Because China, to some extent, with their One Belt, One Road, which is now just Belt and Road, I think, Silk Road initiatives, is to some extent impact investing. You agree?
Yes, from a Chinese perspective, absolutely. I mean, we follow these activities actually very closely, because China is really taking position in many countries where we are also active in particular taking over entire infrastructure projects. Transportation, healthcare system, which I think to one part, you know, is a very good development because it really does develop these countries. I've been in Sri Lanka 2 months ago, you know, fantastic what's going on there. Everything is in Chinese hands, however. And so I think the key question there is, you know, despite having this infrastructure being built, it's very important to really integrate local people. And that is something where I see a little bit of caveat. You know, if you look at these building construction sites, you've got thousands of Chinese workers who have been basically, you know, shipped into these countries, and the local workforce does not really participate. So it's kind of, you know, a built-in situation or a city within a city that I'm not quite sure if that is going to be really beneficial for these local countries. So I think politically, one really needs to be very attentive how this is going to develop.
Right, it's a big part of the world. You know, it's a big percentage of the world living there. Okay, just to finish up now, where are you off to next? Now we're going to put your Indiana Jones hat back on. Where are you off to next?
Not that I'm heading off to Tokyo tomorrow, where I'm going to meet a governmental organization, and amongst others also, I think I'll have a meeting with the Prime Minister. Japan is very active in impact investing. They've created a huge program to empower women in Southeast Asia. So 3 years ago, we started to really work very strongly together and to identify opportunities where the Japanese government really can deploy assets in neighboring countries to really support women. A fantastic project.
And a project I would love to get into at a later date. Thank you so much for being with us today. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but it was wonderful.